The sound of my daughter's voice on the phone was what made my knees buckle. "Mommy, why is there a sign in front of Grandma's house?" I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine still running, a bag of bananas slowly warming in the passenger seat. My mother had been gone for 6 months. The house, the yellow Craftsman on Alderwood Lane, where I learned to ride a bike, where she stayed up all night sewing my prom dress by hand, where I sat next to her bed in the final weeks, was the only thing she left me. Not because she had nothing else. Because it was the most important thing she had. I drove there in 7 minutes. I know, because I counted. The sign was real. White letters on a dark blue background. SOLD. A lockbox already hung from the front door handle. The rose bushes my mother planted the year I was born had been trimmed back brutally, the kind of trim that says, "This will be gone soon." I stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, and I did not understand what I was looking at because I had never signed anything. Not a listing agreement, not a sales contract, not a transfer of any kind. I called my husband. He didn't pick up. I called again. He sent me to voicemail. I drove to his parents' house. My mother-in-law was in the kitchen when I walked in, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair, a cup of green tea steaming at her elbow. She looked up at me with the particular expression she reserved for situations she had already decided the outcome of: pleasant, slightly bored, immovable. "The Alderwood house closed yesterday," she said, before I could speak. "We got a very fair price. You should be happy." I told her I hadn't signed anything. She set down her cup with a soft click. "You have power of attorney on file with our firm, Dana. Marcus helped you set it up last spring when your mother was in hospice. You were overwhelmed. It was the practical thing to do." She folded her hands on the table. The house was a liability, not a legacy. Property taxes, maintenance, a neighborhood that isn't appreciating. We liquidated it, and the funds have been rolled into the family trust, where they'll actually grow. I heard myself say that I had never given anyone permission to sell that house. My mother-in-law tilted her head. "Sweetheart, you signed the document." "I did not. There's a notarized record that says otherwise." "Show it to me." She smiled the way a person smiles when they believe they will never be asked to prove anything. "Of course." When the paperwork settles, my husband came home from wherever he had been 40 minutes later. He smelled like the coffee shop near his office, and he walked into the kitchen with the careful, deliberate posture of someone who had been briefed. I could tell by the way he looked at me. Not surprised, not confused, just braced. "She told you," he said. "Tell me you didn't know about this." He set his keys on the counter. He wouldn't look at my face directly. He looked at my collarbone, my shoulder, just to the side of me, the way he had always done when he was about to say something he had rehearsed. Mom handled it. The house was going to cost us $12,000 a year in taxes and upkeep. It made sense to liquidate while the market— Marcus. I never signed anything. Dana. His voice dropped, the temperature dropping with it. "Let's not make this ugly." I told him that I was going to call a lawyer. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that too. "You can," he said. "But I want you to think about what that looks like. A young mother, grieving, paranoid, making accusations against her family. Who's going to believe that my mother flew a notary to our house to forge your signature on a legal document? Or are you going to say we made the whole power of attorney up?" He finally met my eyes. "You signed it, Dana. In April. You were exhausted. You probably don't remember." I remembered April with perfect, terrible clarity. My mother had stopped recognizing me by then. I had signed nothing. The next morning, my mother-in-law called me into the sitting room. She had a way of conducting meetings in her own home that made you feel like a junior employee who had already been evaluated unfavorably. She sat in the wingback chair by the window. My father-in-law was there too, standing near the bookshelf with his arms crossed, a decorative endorsement. She slid a manila folder across the coffee table toward me. Inside was a document titled Ratification and Acknowledgement of Prior Authorization, 12 pages. My name was on every signature line, blank, waiting. "We're asking you to ratify the sale retroactively," she said. "It tidies the record. The buyer's title company is asking for a clean chain of authorization, and this provides it." I closed the folder. "You want me to sign a document that confirms I authorized a sale I never authorized. We want you to stop creating a problem out of something that benefited this family." I asked what happened if I didn't sign. She looked at me for a long moment. Marcus handles a significant portion of the clients that come through your freelance business. Referrals from his firm? That goes away. Your lease on the studio space, that building is owned by a holding company that we have a relationship with. Renewal is coming up in January. She paused, and our attorney has advised us that a mother in the middle of a legal dispute, making accusations against family members, is not the most stable environment for a 4-year-old. We would be obligated to raise that concern formally if this escalates. There it was. My daughter. They had gone straight there. My father-in-law cleared his throat. We're not trying to threaten you, Dana. We're asking you to be reasonable. The money is in the trust. It grows for the family. For your daughter. Sign the paper and we can all move forward. I took the folder. I said I needed time to review it. Of course, my mother-in-law said, and smiled. I sat in my car outside their house for 22 minutes before I could drive. The thing about being married into a family like this is that the walls close in slowly, so slowly that you don't realize how small the room has gotten until you try to move and find you can't. They hadn't taken anything from me all at once. They had just built the architecture of my dependency over 4 years without me noticing. The client referrals, the studio lease, the babysitting schedule that kept my daughter at their house 3 afternoons a week, which I had thought was generosity and now understood differently. They had constructed a cage so comfortable I had mistaken it for a home. My college friend Priya was a contracts attorney. I called her from the parking lot of a coffee shop the next morning, sitting in the corner booth farthest from the window, my voice low. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "Tell me exactly how the document was signed. What kind of notarization?" I pulled up the listing on the county recorder's website. The property transfer had already been filed. I read her the notary information. "Remote online notarization," she said. "Dana, that matters. Do you understand what that means?" I told her I didn't know enough to know. Every RON session is recorded. Video. The entire signing, the identity verification, the facial recognition scan. The platform is required by law to store that recording, and the full audit log every IP address, every device ID, every timestamp, for a minimum of 10 years. She paused again. If someone impersonated you in a remote notarization session, the video of that person exists. Somewhere on a server, there is a recording of whoever pretended to be you. My hands went cold. The platform can be subpoenaed, she said. Or, in some states, the actual signer, which means you has the right to request the audit log directly, because the document is in your name. You can file a written request as the named signatory. I asked if my mother-in-law would know I was doing this. Not if you move quickly. These requests go through the platform's legal compliance department. They don't notify the firm that ordered the notarization unless there's a legal hold. Right now, they have no reason to expect you're looking. I sent the request from my work email at 11:17 that morning. The following 4 days were the worst of my life, and I have had some genuinely terrible days. Marcus and I stopped talking in the organic way that marriages stop talking when one person knows the other knows, and neither of them wants to be the one to say it out loud. He started sleeping in the guest room without explanation. My mother-in-law texted me twice asking when I would be returning the ratification paperwork. The lease renewal notice arrived in my email, January 15th deadline. The subtext was not subtle. On the 3rd night, I woke at 2 in the morning to find Marcus standing in the doorway of the bedroom. He was holding my laptop. "You sent a records request to the notarization platform," he said. "Not a question." I sat up. "Put that down. Mom has a contact at the title company. They flagged an inquiry from your email." He set the laptop on the dresser, but the way he did it careful, deliberate, told me he had already been through it. "You need to withdraw the request, Dana. If this goes further, it becomes a criminal matter. Do you understand what that does to our daughter? To your business? To your name?" I told him I understood exactly what it did to my name. "Withdraw the request," he said again. "Sign the ratification. I will make sure you are compensated fairly from the trust. We can put a number on paper, whatever makes you feel compensated for my mother's house." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were flat. "I love you, but my family has resources that you don't. If this becomes a fight, it becomes a very unequal fight. I'm asking you as your husband to step back." I did not sleep after he left the room. The next morning, I found that my access to the shared cloud storage, where I kept client files, project archives, 3 years of freelance work had been removed. Marcus had been listed as an emergency contact on the account, and he had used that to lock me out under a password change. My studio's property management sent an email informing me that due to a change in ownership structure, they would not be renewing month-to-month leases and required a decision on the annual contract by end of week. By noon, I had lost access to my files. By 3 o'clock, 2 of my largest clients, both referrals from Marcus's firm, had emailed to say they were moving their projects in a different direction. I sat in my car outside my daughter's school waiting for pickup, and felt the walls of the room they had built for me press in from all 4 sides simultaneously. They were better at this than I was. They had done it before. That thought hit me clearly and coldly. They had done this to someone before. I picked up my daughter. I took her for ice cream. I watched her eat a scoop of mint chip and tell me about a bird that had flown into the classroom window and stunned itself on the glass, and how her teacher had carried it outside in cupped hands, and how it had sat very still for a long time, and then simply flown away. She told me this story with complete seriousness, the way children deliver important information, as though the bird's recovery was a matter she had been personally responsible for. I drove her to my friend Priya's apartment instead of home. I hadn't told Priya I was coming. I stood at her door with my daughter on my hip and a bag with 2 days of clothing for each of us. And when she opened the door and saw my face, she stepped aside without a word. After my daughter fell asleep on Priya's couch, I told Priya about the laptop, the files, the clients, the lease, all of it. "Did you receive anything from the notarization platform before he locked you out?" she asked. And that was the moment I remembered. I had received an email. 3 days ago, a confirmation from the platform's compliance department acknowledging my records request and stating that the documents would be sent to my email within 5 to 7 business days. That email had come in at 6:42 in the morning, before Marcus would have had any reason to be watching. I had read it half asleep and not thought about it again. I had not yet received the actual audit log, but I had given Priya's email as the secondary contact on the request. I had done it automatically, the way you list a second person on a medical form, because Priya was always my second person for everything. I had not even consciously registered that I had done it. Priya opened her laptop. The email from the platform had arrived that afternoon, while I was buying ice cream. Full audit log attached, video recording attached, identity verification record attached. We watched the video together. The woman on the screen was not me. She was close, similar hair color, similar age range, the kind of close that works on a 2-inch webcam thumbnail if no one is looking carefully. But she was not me. And the government ID she had held up to the camera was not my driver's license. My license has a small diagonal scratch through the lower left corner from the time I dropped my wallet on the subway platform in 2019. The ID in the video was pristine. The IP address in the audit log resolved to a business address. It took Priya 11 seconds to identify it as the office suite my mother-in-law's personal assistant worked from. The timestamp on the signing session was April 14th. I pulled up my phone and found, without any difficulty, a photo I had posted to a private family album on that exact date. Me and my mother, in her hospital room, 300 miles away. My face. Händen. A date-stamped image from a location-enabled device, uploaded through an app that logged the GPS coordinates in the metadata, because I had turned that setting on the year my daughter was born, and never turned it off. I was in a hospital room on April 14th. Someone else was in a webcam signing my name. Priya made us both tea, and we sat at her kitchen table until midnight. She filed the complaint with the State Attorney General's office at 9 the next morning. Forgery of a legal document. Identity fraud in a remote notarization proceeding. Fraudulent real estate transfer. She also contacted the State Notary Commission and the RON platform directly to flag the compromised session. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. Not a trial, not yet. A preliminary evidence review before a judge to determine whether an emergency order should issue to freeze the transferred property pending a full fraud investigation. Marcus sent me 12 text messages in the first week. They started as appeals and ended as warnings. I did not respond to any of them. My mother-in-law called twice from a number I didn't recognize, which told me she already knew I had blocked her. I let both calls go to voicemail. I did not listen to the voicemails. My daughter and I stayed at Priya's. She started calling it a sleepover, which is the gift that children have the ability to rename hard things into manageable ones. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, institutional lighting, the smell of recycled air and old carpet. I sat at the petitioner's table with Priya beside me, and a state's attorney named Mr. Calloway, who had picked up the criminal fraud component and wore a very inexpensive tie with enormous personal confidence. My mother-in-law sat across the room with two attorneys I did not recognize, both of whom had the practiced calm of people billing $400 an hour to be calm on someone else's behalf. Marcus was not there. The judge was a woman in her late 50s. She reviewed the materials before the session, which meant she had already watched the video. I could tell, because when my mother-in-law's attorneys stood to argue that the records request was irregular and the audit log had been obtained through improper channels, the judge raised one hand. "I've reviewed the audit log," she said, "and the video, and the identity verification submission. Counsel, I'd like you to explain to me whose face is on this recording, because I'm looking at it right now and it is not your client's daughter-in-law." The room was very quiet. One of the attorneys said something about chain of custody. The judge looked at him without expression. "The video is time-stamped, device-stamped, and IP logged by a third-party platform operating under state RON regulations," she said. "Its evidentiary integrity is not in question. What I am asking is a simpler question. Who is the person in this video? Because the petitioner has submitted a photograph with GPS metadata, placing her in a hospital 300 miles from this IP address on the same date and time as this notarization session." The attorney said his clients had no knowledge of any irregularity in the process. "Your client's assistant's office IP address is in the audit log," Mr. Calloway said pleasantly. "We can be less polite about this, if that's more helpful." My mother-in-law turned to look at me for the first time since I had walked in. I had spent 3 weeks rehearsing what I would feel in this moment. I thought I would feel triumphant, or vindicated, or at least some clean and satisfying version of anger. What I actually felt was tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has spent a long time carrying something they should not have had to carry. I didn't look away from her. I just looked, and I let her see that I was not afraid of her anymore. The judge issued the emergency freeze on the property within the hour. The sale was suspended, pending a full fraud investigation. The buyer's transaction was voided through title insurance because the title company, faced with a notarized document now under active fraud review, moved with impressive speed to protect themselves. The criminal referral went to the district attorney the same afternoon. Forgery, identity fraud, wire fraud, because the fraudulent document had crossed state lines electronically. My mother-in-law was not arrested in the hearing room. That is not how it works, and I want to be precise about this because I don't want to tell it the way people imagine it happening. What happened was quieter and, in some ways, worse for her. She walked out of that room into the hallway, and there were 2 investigators waiting who asked to speak with her, and her attorneys moved to flank her, and the whole group moved together toward a conference room, and the door closed. That was it. No handcuffs in public, no spectacle. Just a door closing on the life she had constructed and believed was permanent. I heard later through Priya, who heard through the attorney network that operates like a very professionally dressed small town, that her personal assistant had been the woman in the video. She had cooperated fully with investigators within 48 hours because she was 26 years old and did not want to go to prison for someone else's real estate scheme. She gave them everything. Marcus filed for separation 2 weeks after the hearing. I accepted it without difficulty. I want to say something honest about this. I grieved the marriage. Not the last version of it, which had been a kind of sustained performance that neither of us believed in anymore, but the early version, the one that had felt like a real thing. I grieved that version in the ordinary, undramatic way that you grieve something that turned out to be different than it appeared. Then I stopped grieving it and started dealing with the logistics, which is what you do when you have a daughter who needs her school lunches packed and her Tuesday dance class attended, and her ongoing concerns about the welfare of birds addressed seriously. The property transferred back to my name 60 days after the fraud determination. The yellow Craftsman on Alderwood Lane was mine again. I went there alone the first time, in the early morning before I picked up my daughter. I sat on the front steps with a cup of coffee and looked at the rose bushes, which were already showing new growth from the brutal trim they'd been given. Roses do that. You cut them back hard, and they come back harder. My mother's attorney, the one who had handled her estate, A quiet man named Mr. Dalton, who wore sensible shoes and sent handwritten notes, called me the following week. There was, he explained, a separate matter he had been holding pending the resolution of the property dispute, as he hadn't wanted to introduce complications to an already complicated situation. My mother had maintained a small investment account for 23 years. She had opened it the year I started elementary school and contributed to it every month without mentioning it to anyone, including me. It had been structured, on the advice of a financial planner she had trusted, in a way that placed it entirely outside probate, outside any marital claim, outside any trust or power of attorney that might be filed by anyone other than her direct chosen beneficiary, which was me. Only me. He read me the account balance. I had to ask him to repeat it. He repeated it. I sat in my car outside my daughter's school, and I thought about my mother, who had pressed coupons on Sundays and bought shoes on clearance and driven the same car for 14 years, quietly and methodically building something she never spent on herself, building it for me, for this specific contingency, the contingency where I might someday need to be free and have the means to do it. She had known. Not about this exact situation, but she had known something about being a woman who needed a door that was entirely her own. My daughter came out of school with a drawing she had made of a bird mid-flight. She had titled it, in large, careful letters, "The Bird That Flew Away." I taped it to the refrigerator in the yellow house on Alderwood Lane, in the kitchen where my mother had made every birthday cake I had ever eaten, under the window where the afternoon light came through, exactly the same as it always had. My daughter climbed up on the counter the way I was not supposed to let her do, and pressed the tape down with both small hands. "Is this our house now?" she asked. I told her yes, this was our house now. She seemed satisfied with this, the way children are satisfied with simple, accurate answers, and she asked if we could have cereal for dinner, which we did.